Hi again, I'm John Nielsen with Wing Chun Hall, talking about how Wing Chun is your best self-defense option. But today, I'm going to do a review of the movie Ip Man 3, which I saw on February 27th. Now, I would like to recommend that movie to not just Wing Chun people and not just martial artists in general, but to everybody who likes good movies, because that's what it is, a good movie. It's not a perfect movie though, so today I'm going to talk about what's right and what's wrong. This movie is very well done. The acting, the directing, cinematography, costume sets, music, etc., everything is very well put together. There are some historical inaccuracies. Given this is historical fiction, and so we expect there to be some liberties taken, but what I expect is kind of for people to take historical people and put them into real locations at the times when they were supposed to be there. That kind of happens in this movie, but again, there are a lot of liberties taken. So the movie has Ip Man in Hong Kong in 1959-1960 with his wife and his youngest son, Ip Ching. Okay, Ip Ching's about 7 years old at the time in the movie. Now, what actually happened is that in 1949, Ip Man moved from Foshan to Hong Kong, and he took his oldest daughter with him. Shortly after that, his wife came to visit, but she didn't stay for long. She went back to Foshan, and she never returned to Hong Kong. She passed away in the early 1960s, at which time Ip Man's sons, Ip Chun and Ip Ching, came to visit him. Ip Chun was about 36 years old, and he had his own family and his own career, and he also found his own place. But Ip Ching, who was about 25, went to live with his father and was with him for the next 10 years of his life until he passed away in 1972. Okay, so that's not how it happens in the movie, but that really shouldn't detract from the themes and the story that they're putting in there. It's just that if you only see the movie and you don't know the historical events, it'll confuse you. There were three big Wing Chun versus some other style fights in this movie. It was boxing, Muay Thai, and Wing Chun versus Wing Chun. So in the boxing fight, what you've got is Donnie Yen versus Mike Tyson. And Mike Tyson does a great job of being intimidating in this, especially against Donnie Yen, who's a very small person. I liked the fight scenes because there was a lot of variety in there and a lot of realism. The realism kind of got detracted from in one way, which wasn't just in this fight, but actually in almost every one of the fights you have a kind of special effect where most of the time they stayed away from like wire work and those kinds of special effects, so that detracts from the realism. But in these particular fight sequences, a lot of times what would happen is somebody would get hit and they would go flying back and they would skid to a stop, and that was overdone, I thought. But otherwise, it was pretty well done. There was a lot of like good punching, good even grappling, and some ground stuff and those kinds of things in the fights. Now, the second one that we want to talk about is Wing Chun versus Muay Thai, which also was really well done. What I liked about it was that they started out in a very confined space and showed how Wing Chun works well that way, and then they moved to a more open space with the Wing Chun person controlling the realistic environment. That was a very well done fight. Then there was Wing Chun versus Wing Chun, and again, what I liked about that is that it showcased a lot of the different options that we have in Wing Chun. So, for instance, you started out with the pole versus the pole, and then they did the long knives versus long knives, and then they went to empty hand. And what I liked about the weapon sequence is that they avoided the typical trap of having people swinging weapons at somebody with no chance of hitting them. A lot of times the way they did that was with clever camera angles and body movement, but they also did that with just a lot of skill, a lot of getting close and really moving around. Very good choreography. They did that with both the pole and the long knives, and then they moved to, like I said, the unarmed combat. And I like that too, because again, it showed a lot of variety, a lot of strikes, both hands and feet. I mean, they were using feet, knees, elbows, palms, fists, forearms, fingertips, etc. And so it was a wonderful showcase of all the different things that you can do in Wing Chun. Now, there were also some multiple attacker fights, quite a few of them, and some of those were good and some of those not so good. And the reason why I say that is because where multiple attackers happened in this movie was a lot of times Ip Man would get surprised. I mean, he'd go into a situation, suddenly there were more than one person coming after him trying to attack him. And of course, in that case, you got to do what you got to do. But there were a couple of times when he went willingly and knowingly into an area where he was outnumbered by dozens of people. And the way that the fights work in here, there's kind of trying to show a contrast between Ip Man and another fighter, where the other fighter is willing to actually go a little farther than Ip Man is, and he's kind of portrayed as a semi-villain, or at least a foil in that movie that way. That's kind of, I guess, a little unfortunate, because if you've got multiple attackers coming around you, you should be willing to go as far as you need to go. But what really bothered me about it was that he voluntarily went into this place where he was knowingly outnumbered. And the only way that he was able to survive was he was fortunately or luckily helped by somebody else who came just at the right time and kind of saved him from that. Okay, so what I don't like about that is that Ip Man was actually trained as a detective when he was in Foshan. He was trained in firearms. I mean, he should have known better tactically not to just wander into the middle of a bunch of people who were trying to kill him. Otherwise, the fight scenes were really entertaining. Ip Man 3 has several clearly stated themes. For instance, Ip Man openly preaches that the martial arts should be used for good, and that what we do is not only for ourselves but for posterity. And that is also very well illustrated, because there are certain characters in the movie that use their skills to do harm. Now, though, it's a little bit hypocritical, because there is one teacher who over and over recriminates himself of being a bad teacher because some of his students went bad. And Ip Man and his students are depicted as paragons of virtue. However, in reality, if you read accounts from Duncan Leung, Hawkins Chung, William Chung about their experiences in Hong Kong with Bruce Lee, and if they're to be believed, then they participated in several criminal activities themselves. In fact, they say that when they were about to turn 18, so when they're 17, 18, they found out that they were getting close to being prosecuted as adults for some of the crimes that they did when they were younger. So that's one of the reasons why some of them had to leave Hong Kong. So it's pretty clear that a teacher can do a lot to introduce his students into the ethics of power, but in the end, he can't really control what they do with what he teaches them. Even Ip Man couldn't do it. Ip Man also openly preaches that the most important thing is to be with the ones you love, and this is illustrated beautifully in the film. Unfortunately, though, the reality was that Ip Man, as I already showed in the history section of this review, wasn't able to be with his wife when she passed away. So it didn't actually work the way, it didn't actually work the way that the movie depicts it. However, the theme is still important, and it's a good thing that they brought that up, because there's so many things that we do in life where we can lose track of what's behind all of that. And that's true a lot of when you're training your Wing Chun. There are certain exercises and drills that you do where it's easy to get caught up in the steps of it, but it's meaningless if you don't keep in mind the most important part of it. I mean, what it's all about. What's the main idea of this exercise that you're doing? In Ip Man 2, a character representing Bruce Lee comes in and asks to be trained by Ip Man, and he's told to come back when he's older. And so in Ip Man 3, he does come back, and there's a series of tests, and unfortunately there's a misunderstanding where Bruce Lee thinks that he got rejected, until later in the movie where Ip Man has an opportunity to explain the misunderstanding. There was a famous misunderstanding between Bruce Lee and Ip Man, but it didn't happen like this. So Bruce Lee actually started studying with Ip Man when he was about 11 years old, until the time when he was about 17 years old, when again he had to leave and go to the United States. He was an intermediate student when he got to the United States, and it was pretty clear that he wanted to continue his training, but he was unable to because there wasn't anybody around who could teach him. So he did start teaching, and one of the reasons that he wanted to do that was because he wanted to have somebody to practice with. But then when he made a name for himself in California, in Hollywood, he went back to Hong Kong, and Bruce Lee asked Ip Man if Yip would allow Lee to film Ip Man doing the last forms of the Wing Chun system, so that he could use that as a training basis, so he could move on in his Wing Chun training. And Ip Man refused. It was at this point that Bruce Lee returned to the United States, and then he started changing the arts that he did, the martial art that he did, and started to call it by different names. Now, some people have used this occasion to suggest that Bruce Lee found Wing Chun inadequate, but he never said that. Also, some people have used this occasion to suggest that there was a rift between Bruce Lee and Yip Man, when, again, nobody really knows what happened during that time. What we do know is that Yip Man, at this point in his life, was going through some serious health problems, and that may have been the reason that he refused to be filmed. And again, we don't really know what happened, but we think William of Ockham would have liked this explanation. In a martial arts story, you have to have an antagonist, and in this series of movies, the antagonists, although the Chinese fight amongst themselves, the real antagonists are always the foreign devils. In Ip Man, it's the Japanese. In Ip Man 2, it's the British. In Ip Man The Legend Begins, it's the Japanese again, and then in Ip Man 3, it's the British again and the Americans. Now, I understand that for political reasons, you can't say in these movies that the reason that Yip Man left Foshan in 1949 is because he was on a communist hit list and he was going to be murdered if he stayed there. And also you can't say that in the time that this movie takes place, that in mainland China they were actually hunting down martial artists, including Wing Chun men, and murdering them as part of the Great Leap Forward. I just find it unfortunate that they had to pick the British in this case, because if it hadn't been for the fact that the British were running Hong Kong, many Chinese martial arts would have gone extinct, probably including Wing Chun. This is an accusation that gets thrown around quite a bit. In the movie, the person who makes the accusation is a person called Chung Tin-shi. Now, that person didn't actually exist, but I believe he was based on Ju Wan and maybe a little Yun Kai-san and the current inhabitants of Gulao Village thrown in together. Now, Chung Tin-shi claims that he learned Wing Chun through a branch from Lung Jian that didn't go through Chen Huashan. That didn't happen. In reality, Chen Huashan had several students, among them a man named Ju Chao, who taught his nephew, Ju Wan. Now, Ju Wan also went to Hong Kong, and he also started a Wing Chun school. But then he went and visited Yip Man's school, and he made a comment that pretty much comes to, he's doing it differently from the way that I learned it when I was in Foshan. He's spending a lot more time on Qisao. But then Ju Wan became Yip Man's student. Okay, some people seem to think that Wing Chun comes, and not just Wing Chun, but several different martial arts come in a straight line, a pure line, and they've got it. Okay, well that's just not how it happens, and it specifically didn't happen that way in Yip Man's case. So Yip Man learned from Chen Huashan, but only for about 3 years when Chen Huashan had a stroke and had to quit teaching. Then Yip Man learned from Ng Chung So, and then when he turned 17, he went to Hong Kong, where he purportedly met up with Lung Bic, the son of Lung Jian, and he studied with him there. And then he went back to Foshan, and he studied with all of his older Kung Fu brothers, getting as much experience with Wing Chun as he could from as many different sources as he could. Okay, now, then he goes to Hong Kong and he starts teaching Wing Chun, and he gets accused of modifying the system who didn't have this broad experience in Wing Chun and don't really know what they're talking about. Now, this happens a lot. Every prominent person in Wing Chun gets accused of modifying the system by people who don't understand it. Lung Jian gets accused, or he admitted that he changed things in the system. Chen Huashan gets accused of changing the system. Ng Chung So, Chen Yumin, Yip Man, Yip Lung Bic, let's see, William Chung, Lung Ting, Ron Heimberger, Alan Orr, me, we all get accused of modifying and changing the system. And that's probably not really what's going on. Probably what's going on is that people who are making those accusations just don't understand the system very well. So Wing Chun is not a sport art which has a style, and they also have restrictions. Wing Chun is about self-defense, which has no restrictions whatsoever. And self-defense is a huge topic, and it's just a vehicle. Wing Chun is just a vehicle towards self-defense. Now, it's impossible for one person, one teacher, to take all those parts and give them equal attention. So what we tend to do is decide which parts we think are the most important and the most interesting, and then emphasize those parts in our school and our teaching. So it's not any kind of big surprise that one qualified teacher is going to be teaching differently from another qualified teacher. What is a problem is if unqualified people, and people who have not been through the entire system, then look at it and then put limitations on it, and then start to say, oh, you changed it, or that they try to modify it when they don't really know what's in it. But the movie is a wonderful vehicle for bringing up these kinds of issues and conflicts and themes, so that then it can be discussed in a very entertaining way. So I hope you'll see it. It's a wonderful show.